Welcome, everyone, to this online event in the series of AI Safety Summit talks, which are organised by the Existential Risk Observatory. My name is David Wood, and I chair London Futurists, who support this series of talks. The UK's Secretary of State for Science, Technology and Innovation, the Right Honourable Michelle Donelan MP, has spoken of what she calls the Bletchley effect, namely, as she puts it, the power of convening brilliant minds to tackle one of humanity's greatest challenges. She was referring to the gathering in November last year at Bletchley Park in the UK, and to the second event in that global series, which is taking place today and tomorrow in Seoul, South Korea. The great challenge in question is how to anticipate and manage the unprecedented disruptions that may arise as advanced AI rapidly becomes more powerful. Over the next 90 minutes, I anticipate another instance of the Bletchley effect. That's because the speakers and panelists who have kindly agreed to take part today all have brilliant minds within their own fields, and they have all thought hard about at least some aspects of how humanity can, and arguably should, respond to the opportunities and risks of forthcoming new advanced AI platforms. We'll start in a moment by hearing from Professor Yoshua Bengio of the University of Montreal. Professor Bengio is a recipient of the Alan Turing Award and is considered to be one of the fathers of deep learning. Among the world's computer scientists, he has the highest H index, meaning in essence that more of his publications have been more widely cited than any other computer scientist. He is also the chair of an international expert advisory panel that was set up after the Bletchley Park Summit last year, which has representatives from over 30 countries and which, significantly, released last Friday an interim scientific report on the safety of advanced AI. A report, if I may say so, that's well worth reading. Later in today's event, we'll have a couple of Q&A sessions, one after Professor Bengio's talk and one following the panel discussion that will take place shortly. Audience members can submit questions for these Q&A sessions using slido.com with the code XRO-YB that you can see above my head. Or there's a direct link inside the description of the video where this is live streaming. Professor Bengio, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, David. Let me share my slides. All right. So I'll be talking about existential risk from AI and some research directions to mitigate it. In particular, I'll talk about an approach to try to design AI that is safe by design. So first of all, when we think about the risks of AI, we shouldn't think only about what is the current state of AI, but the trajectory in which we are. And if we go back, a decade or two, it's very clear that there are continuous advances can be measured in machine learning benchmarks across many different types of tasks. What you see here with the black line is human level performance on these tasks. And the other thing to notice here is that you see more recent benchmarks where the acceleration or the speed of improvement with AI has been faster than in earlier years. Okay, so we also have to be a bit careful about these numbers, in particular with large language models. It gets difficult to get sure we evaluate things correctly, but nonetheless. There is uncertainty even in what is the current state of capabilities, but what is even more important is the capabilities of AIs that will come up next year and 5 years or 10 years. And there's a lot of disagreement across AI scientists about this. Clearly, as these systems will approach human level or AGI, there's going to be stronger impacts, both on the positive side and the negative side. And we have to start thinking about these things. Be prudent, even if we're not sure what the trajectory is, both in time and the level of capabilities. We need to avoid the situation in which we're just racing, towards a fog behind which there could be a precipice, and we just don't know. So there are two main things we have to deal with, and we have to do both in order to avoid these potential catastrophes. One is more technical and the other is more political. So the first one is how do we make sure the AIs we build don't harm us? And there are different aspects of this, including being able to evaluate that they could harm us. And the second aspect is how do we actually not just stop if there's a problem, but also try to make them safe by construction. It is also a political challenge because I think that we need to solve this problem quickly, given the uncertainty in the timeline, so that when AGI arrives, we don't end up with machines that are smarter than us and that we don't know how to control. The second problem, of course, is coordination. Even if we knew how to build a safe AI or how to evaluate properly the dangers of an AI, how do we make sure that all the countries on this planet follow these protocols? And it's hard because of the dynamics of human societies, markets. There's a competition between companies, there's a competition between countries, and it's hard to stop that race. The incentive in such a competitive framework is to try to increase capabilities, but not necessarily pay as much attention to safety. The other kind of problem that needs to be addressed with governance is the abuse of the power that future AI will provide, especially when we reach AGI. So there's a danger that individuals or corporations grab that power for themselves at the expense of everyone else, including everyone else's safety. And it could be individuals, corporations, or even governments. So let me go back to the fact that we don't have a clear line of sight of when AGI will happen. What it means is, in my opinion, that we should have a kind of anytime preparedness, that we should be prepared with the best possible tools, both technically and politically, for any of the possible horizons for AGI. So if AGI comes in 2 years from now, we need to have the best possible methods to detect it, for example. If it comes later, we would like to have stronger technical solutions to these problems. And similarly for the politics, right? In other words, what this all means is that we need a spectrum of approaches, both technical and political, in order to be, in the best possible situation whenever AGI is reached. Now, AGI, being reached isn't not necessarily one moment, because we could have AIs that are strong in one thing and stupid in the other, but that gives us, I think, a good way to think about the problem. So in the short term, there are things we already do that we need to improve upon, finding better ways of interpreting what is going on inside those models so that we can see something bad coming along, and the various evaluation methods, as well as continuing to improve the current methods for alignment and adversarial robustness, and analyzing and better understanding the failure modes that we anticipate, such as the issue that come when these systems are trained to maximize rewards. But I think we also need to get started with more ambitious projects in case the AGI comes later. And I'll talk about these safe by design approach that I'm working on. And it's hard, it's going to take more time to get systems that give us guarantees. On the other hand, once we reach AGI and eventually superhuman AI systems, it seems that we really want to have the strongest possible guarantees before we unleash something like this. What I'll talk about later is a case of trying to get probabilistic guarantees because the world has a lot of uncertainty and we have a finite amount of data to train our systems. Okay, so let's try to go back and understand a bit the risks. Maybe the most important bit of information here is simply that the way that AI is constructed, the way that we understand intelligence is about achieving goals or answering questions properly. But of course, that can be applied to any goal, good and bad ones. And that's why AI is fundamentally dual use. And any advance in capability can be turned into something good or something bad. So who sets the goals? That becomes a political problem. But there's also the issue of losing control, where the goals are set by the AI itself. If the AI has a primary goal of self-preservation, then it would resist being turned off, and there would be a conflict between humans and machines. So how could that self-preservation goal happen? Well, there are many possible paths, including humans giving that to the machines. So how do we make sure these things don't happen? We want to make sure the AI's intentions are as aligned as possible with ours, including our norms and moral choices and social choices. And that's alignment, but we also want to have some kind of guardrails to make sure, independent of their intentions, they act properly, and that's a control problem. And the current methods for evaluations or alignment or control are just insufficient in many ways. For example, they're based on evaluating a few, a finite number of possible cases. So if there's something wrong that we didn't see, we don't have any handle on it. So that's a problem. One thing that really worries me is that there are people who want to see humans replaced by superhuman AIs. And it would only take a few people and a few instructions to turn an AGI into a rogue one. Which could then, gain control in the real world in various ways. Initially, if robotics hasn't been solved, it could still do a lot of damage and get a lot of control, making money, hiring people, copying itself, using cyber attacks to get influence on the world. And if the AI or humans figure out how to bridge the gap also in robotics, then humans wouldn't be needed anymore by the AI. Okay, let me quickly share one example of scenario that through which the AI could become self-preserving, even though we didn't train it to do that. And that would come out of simply the maximization of rewards, which is currently the way we know how to train an AI agent that does things in the world. So we basically give it a reward when it performs well. This could be done by humans or could be done by a reward function that we write, or a combination of both. And the image I like to use here is how we train animals with rewards. For example, how you train your cat by giving it feedback when it does bad things. And the cat is not more powerful than you, but if you want to train an animal that's more powerful than you, like a grizzly bear, then you need some precautions. Maybe you put the bear in a cage and you give it the reward, like fish, through the bars of the cage. One problem right now is we don't know how to build such a cage. We've tried, but people find hacks around all of the safety protections we currently have. That's a problem. And so you could imagine that if the bear was smarter than us, it would find a way out of the cage. It would, hack the lock or something. And the smarter it is, the more compute we put into it, the better the algorithms, the greater the capability, the more are the chances that it finds a way to hack the cage. So that's a problem because we're clearly on a trajectory to give these AI systems more cognitive powers. There are technical questions that can be raised, but if this is going to happen, even if we stop giving it rewards because it's being trained and now it's deployed, and my answer to this is it would internalize the reward function even if it doesn't call it anymore, and so we would end up with more or less the same situation. Okay, so now why wouldn't we just stop building things that we don't understand and could be more powerful than us? Well, that's, I think, if we could do that, that would be great. But humanity is not a single mind. Humanity is a lot of people with different objectives and competition between them, as I said. And this dynamics is leading into very high probability that if we reach AGI, somebody will not do the right thing and we'll end up with a dangerous system on our hands. And if we have a superhuman AI system with bad intentions, how could we defend and succeed? I think that the only option I can see is that somehow we solve the problem of alignment and control and build an AI that can be superhuman and protect us. But we have to do it right, because, well, if we don't do things well, we could lose control as well of that system. If we don't do things well technically, and if we don't do things well at the governance level, then that AI could be abused. Control of that AI could fall in hands that just seek power, which is a natural thing for humans. So we need very strong governance mechanisms that would be multi-stakeholder, multilateral, democratic, to make sure that no single person, no single corporation, and no single government can take control of a future AGI. Okay, so now let me move to the technical parts of what I want to talk about. I think I and others have the intuition that needs further elaboration that if we build an AGI that is not an agent, maybe it'll be less dangerous. So for example, the argument of reward maximization that I talked about doesn't seem to apply. What if we build an AI that just tries to understand the world like a scientist? I call it an AI scientist. I should have called it a scientist AI, but anyways. There's a way to think about this in Bayesian terms. If you train a machine to come up with explanations for how the world works, theories that explain the data, it doesn't do anything. It's just trying to come up with good scientific theories. So think of it like an AI that writes scientific papers and doesn't do anything in the world. It doesn't have any goal. Well, that could be useful. There are lots of scientific problems that we could use help with, of course, in medicine, the environment, and more. But if that kind of AI can't do anything, how would it protect us from a rogue AGI? Well, one interesting path that people have been talking about is such a scientist AI could help us design better AI systems in the sense of safer AI systems, right? So again, imagine you've got a peer scientist working with you and they're smarter than you, but they basically answer the questions you ask. So there's a chance we could accelerate the AI safety research program using something like this. Of course, we would still have to be careful that such a system doesn't fall in the wrong hands, because an oracle could be used as an agent and could be used for bad purposes. So the political problem, is still there. Now, let's go a little bit deeper about how we could build something like this and how we could turn it into a safe agent. So if we build a machine that tries to explain the data, explain its experience, there's two ways we could do that. So the current way we train these systems is they just predict the data, the next piece of data given the previous piece of data. So that's autoregressive machine learning. The other approach is model-based, meaning that we try to separate the modeling of how the world works with the machinery that tries to answer questions about the world. So right now, when we have an LLM, it's both of these things together. It's really trying to answer questions, because predicting the next thing when the previous things were a question, that's an inference machine. It's something that can apply the knowledge to new cases. But there's another option to kind of illustrate what that could look like. Think about AlphaGo. So in AlphaGo, we only learn an inference machine. The model of how the world works is fixed. It's the rules of the game of Go. Right? So we see that if we had a model of how things work, we could train another system that applies that knowledge through lots and lots of training, and maybe giving a very, very big neural net to answer questions. Now, if we contrast these two approaches, the standard end-to-end directly learning the inference and the model-based approach, it's interesting that there's a potential for much better sample efficiency with the model-based approach. And the reason, again, going back to the Go scenario, is that the description of how things work is like, physics or chemistry or biology. It's just a few bits of information compared to how many bits of information you need to specify the inference machine. And the theory of machine learning 101, you would know that the amount of data you need is proportional to how many bits of information you need to figure out. Okay, so this could generalize better if we could make it work. But the way we currently know how to train these model-based approaches is with maximum likelihood, and it's also how we train the direct inference machines like LLMs. And in both cases, we can have systems that are confidently wrong, right? In the case of reinforcement learning, that can believe that they will get a lot of reward somewhere with high confidence, and that's dangerous in both cases. So how could we get around that? Well, in principle, at least, we should be Bayesian. So what does that mean? I have a little example here. So imagine you got an AI, like a little robot here, and it has very simple choice in front of it. It can take the left door or the right door, which we see on the right. So it's just this binary choice. And now, based on its experience, there are actually two theories, two interpretations of how the world works that it could entertain. And according to the first theory, that the bubble on the left, taking the left door would be terrible, taking the right door would be great. But the other theory says something different. It says the left door, get some cake, it's great. Right door, nothing good, nothing bad. Okay, so if we were to train the AI with maximum likelihood or reinforcement learning, any of the theories that is compatible with the data could be selected. There's no real preference here. They're all equally valid, and they all minimize the training objective. So, if we're lucky, we pick the right one. what if the right one is the correct one is the one on the left here with the death on the left door, and we pick the wrong one. So that's like two coin flips here. So with 25% chances, we would end up dying. That's not good, or killing somebody. That's not good either. And so what are the options? Well, the option is to keep in mind both theories, right? And if you knew that both theories are plausible, then I think you would immediately say, I'm going to be cautious. I see that one of the theories predicts something really bad on the left door, so I'm going to take the right door, which overall, doesn't get anything really bad under any theory. So that is basically what I'm proposing to do, but on not a toy case, but more generally for understanding how the world works. You might ask, why should I care about being Bayesian and all, having to keep in mind all these theories? If the amount of data we use becomes really large, we do use trillions of data these days, shouldn't we converge to a single explanation for things? And the answer is unfortunately not. It has to do with causality theory, the fact that we can't intervene on everything in the world. And so, think about like the Big Bang. We can't go back to the Big Bang and do experiments. We can't even go to the sun and like do something like to the sun right now. So there's going to be very likely some uncertainty about what is the right explanation for things. And in order to avoid making terrible mistakes, somehow we need to keep that uncertainty around. Another maybe more practical case of why we need uncertainty is the robot, the AI can't be really completely sure about what humans want, because what humans want is in their mind, and we don't have, they don't have direct access to it. And even if the humans say things, they could say something different, or natural language gives us an imperfect rendering of what they really want, what they really feel. So in order to get really safety, as Stuart Russell pointed out in his book, Human Compatible, you need that kind of Bayesian modeling of the, what humans intend. Okay, so I came up with a little bit of math that could help us, formalize the ideas in this little scenario that I had. And it says that if we can estimate conditional probability, so here the different letters stand for harm, or in general something bad happening. A for action, C is the context in which the AI is going to take an action, and we have some data on which the AI is going to be trained. There is a quantity that they really care about, which we see in the bottom equation, which is the probability of harm under a true theory T star. So the true probability that something bad will happen if we act in a particular way, if the AI acts in a particular way. It turns out that, of course, we don't know what that is because we don't know what is the correct theory, but the correct theory has a very particular property, which is that it's consistent with the data. That's what essentially proposition 1 says. And being consistent means it has a high posterior probability. And so because of that, we can come to a bound and say, well, the probability under the true theory must be less or equal to the probability under a kind of cautious theory, the capital T, which is one that is both plausible, that's like the equation in the second line, both plausible, in other words, its posterior probability is high, and it predicts the high probability of harm. And so this is something that in principle machine learning could help us deal with, and this is essentially the research program that I'm on to. So how we would use this? Well, when we apply our AI in the real world, we could use a filter, something that people already do in AI companies. In other words, before we produce an output, we check that output here, the action A, isn't going to be really bad. And we want to be conservative when we take that decision. So that's perfect. We could reject the actions that, correspond to a conservative estimate of the probability of harm being above a threshold. There's a typo. It should be greater than threshold. Okay, so then, it becomes a question of how do we estimate these probabilities, these Bayesian probabilities, This involves difficult, these quantities are intractable if we want to get them exactly, so it's going to be approximated. In my group, we've been working on a general methodology for probabilistic inference, which I think could be applied in this setting called G-flow nets, which I won't have time to go into. But the general idea, which is now nice, is that although we can only approximate these probabilities, we can be sure that as we train these systems with bigger neural nets and train them for longer, in other words, we minimize their training objective, they will do a better job of approximating these conditional probabilities, which means that we'll have tighter safety guarantees. So this is not, ideally we get like hard guarantees, except that I think the world is too complicated to make sure we can have hard guarantees. Maybe we can, in which case we should. But this approach allows us to use the power of modern machine learning in order to come up with guardrails that are probabilistic, but that nonetheless would have the advantage that they give us these conservative estimates that become better as we throw more compute at the problem. Whereas where I started with the example with the bear is the opposite scenario, where the more compute we throw into the AI, the more dangerous it gets. Here, the more compute we put into the AI, the safer it gets. So that's nice. I've started a research group on this project, and I'm recruiting people spanning the research scientist to the research engineer to make that happen. I have also written about it on my blog, so you can see more technical details there. And I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating. So what do other computer scientists think about the methods that you've just been advocating, this research program that you've outlined? Are they cautiously interested? Are they critical? Do they want to get on board with it?
I don't see like any. I think the first reaction of many people is this is too hard, right? How do we estimate these probabilities? And another reaction, but I think we have to try, right? So because remember my argument at the beginning that we need to be prepared for any timeline of AGI, and currently we don't have any option that would give us any kind of guarantee. So at least here we get some guarantees. The other concern I get is, well, yeah, it's ambitious, and do we have enough time? And again, we should try all the things that are maybe tweaking the current approaches, because they'll be ready earlier, and the things that could protect us better in case a rogue AGI shows up. If we don't have a safe AGI that's as safe as we can, then we might be in trouble. Let's see. So there are also lots of technical questions that have been raised. For example, about how do we make sure that what is harm? Like we don't have like labeled data that says this is harm. So part of my plan, which I discussed in the blog, has to do with using the data we have, like the data that's used to train LLMs, to implicitly define what is harm. But it's going to be ambiguous. So harm is now something that is like a random variable that we don't have a full handle on. But that's okay, right? So if you even like go now and ask GPT-4 about what is bad, what is immoral, what is harm, it has some thoughts about it, except that it could be too certain of what it thinks it is, and we need this Bayesian approach in order to keep epistemic humility, as it's called, in these AI systems, which I think is one of the biggest issues with current approaches. They're lacking humility, if I can say so, as well as maybe the corporations building these systems.
I'm going to mainly take questions from the Q&A that have more thumbs up than others. So I'm going to take a question from David Mannheim, who refers to your ideas of an AI scientist as an oracle AI. But he says, what do you think of the objections that people like Eliezer Yudkowsky have raised about keeping an AI in such a manner? Won't it find devious ways, new physical ways or new psychological ways to charm its way out of any restriction?
Yeah, I didn't call it, I mean, it is an oracle AI, but it would be trained in a particular way, right? Um, it would be trained to find explanations for things. So its training objective isn't related to like doing things in the world. Its training objective is purely like a pure scientist, like come up with a paper that does a better job than other papers at explaining some aspects of the world. Right? So that's its objective. And it doesn't have like its objective excludes like doing things in the world in order to achieve something. So it's not like a scientist who would do experiments in order to answer the question. It would just look at the data that humans have collected or machines have collected and find a better objective, a better explanation, which can be formalized in terms of a Bayesian posterior, right? So yes, an oracle could potentially be dangerous as well. I agree. But I think that there is a way to train them that would be a lot safer. Now, what I don't have, and I think there's a lot of interesting potential theory to do here, is how do we prove that my intuition about coming up with a scientist objective Bayesian posterior is safe. I just have my very strong conviction, but I think if people can disprove my claim, that's also good. I think this is a very important question.
So it's reassuring to hear that there are quite a few ideas in AI safety, or possible research programs, but it seems
Indeed.
that the capabilities are going much faster. So here's a question from somebody anonymous. What do you think are the key bottlenecks that are preventing AI safety from going faster and keeping up with the capabilities? Is it lack of talent, lack of funding, or is it unhelpful lack of cooperation between AI safety organizations?
I think it's mostly lack of the right incentives. Right now, if you're one of my grad students, you want to get a job in one of the companies, and the companies compete with each other, and they're going to be competing mostly on capability. Um, so there's a huge pressure to improve capability and not so much pressure to improve safety. So that's one primary reason. Another reason is safety came on the radar screen of people only recently. And in the AI community, there's been a lot of negative reactions to even talking about catastrophic outcomes of AI, which is understandable. Like psychologically, if somebody tells you that your work could be harming people, you would maybe just try to defend yourself, right? And reject those arguments. Not listen to reason. Reason here says, well, we're not sure either way, so we should pay attention to this because the potential harm could be huge. So there are a number, but I think that last issue is slowly going away. And the problem with incentives is something that's harder to change, but that really depends on governments. If governments did essentially ask the companies to demonstrate that their system will be safe in a strong sense before they can be built and deployed, then the companies would have a huge incentive to do the right thing. And then it would become like the main project of humanity, at least in computer science. And there will be a lot more students, interested in doing it.
So how do we build incentives how do we build a consensus that that's the right incentives? more generally, and I'm reading the top most voted question here by Yele Donders, he says there's a lot of disagreement in how we should best mitigate risk from AI. So we've faced the risk of collective decision paralysis analysis without taking action. How can we build consensus that something needs to be done and actually this is what should be done?
Yeah, it's hard. I'm trying what I can. Um, but I would say my instinct here is the best thing we can do is increase the global level of awareness regarding the potential catastrophic outcomes. And governments respond to public opinion. So right now, there are polls suggesting that people, would like to see governments do something about the risks of AI, with a vast majority, but they don't put this as a very high priority. Like it's down the list of 20 other things that they can be asked, if they worry about. And so long as it remains a marginal topic, governments are not to take it very seriously. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not I'm a computer scientist. I'm not a political scientist, but I wish I knew the answer to that question.
Well, maybe the other panelists who will be joining us shortly will have some answer to that as well. But one thing you did talk about was paying attention to possible early signs of danger getting worse. So a question from Raphael RR, can you point to realistic early warning criteria that could perhaps be written into law and would catalyze a much more vigorous response if that trip line was passed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very important. So people have talked about red lines that we really don't want an AI to have capabilities that could be turned against us, or either because we lose control or in hands with malicious goals. And already, I think that the work being done in various organizations, including the AI labs themselves, aim at detecting these things. So when I look at these methods with the eye of a computer scientist and machine learning researcher, what I believe is the most promising is when we can automate the search for a potentially dangerous capability or bad intention. The traditional way of red teaming and evaluations based on handcrafted question only goes so far. The space of possibilities is just too large, and we need to bring the power of optimization and machine learning into how we do these things. That's where I would put my money.
Thanks. And final question for you, Professor Bengio. Somebody's been reading your paper in Science anonymously. He has asked a question, he or she. He says the paper has some strong wording, but it stops short of calling for a global moratorium on AGI. Shouldn't that request be part of that paper?
Well, we've tried that last year, Didn't work. What worked last year, of course, is just raising the awareness. And I think there are too many forces, including competition between countries, by the way, not just between companies, that make it difficult here to have global acceptance of, okay, let's just stop. And realistically, it's not going to happen in the foreseeable future. So what's the second best thing we could do is develop, all these governance mechanisms, evaluations, transparency, do a better job of monitoring, with hardware changes, and all of these things that can avoid the catastrophic scenarios with some probability. But of course, none of these is foolproof. That's part of the problem. But at least these are things that are closer to what legislators are talking about, and we need to fight the political battle now to move the needle in the right direction. So we need to be able to make concrete proposals to governments. Um, Even that battle is very hard.
Well, the good news is there are lots of people willing to roll up their sleeves a bit and get involved in this battle. More and more people are paying attention to this subject. So I want to thank you for being a leader in setting out ideas on this front. We'll point people in the commentary to where they can read more of your ideas in the blog. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor Bengio. And I now want to welcome our panelists onto the stage. Thanks again. By a miracle of Zoom, we are joined by a fascinating set of panelists. I'm not going to try to introduce them individually, since they're all far too distinguished, and I'm going to miss out lots of their biography. I will ask them to introduce themselves briefly. We're going to go around the panel, and I'll pay attention to the text chat if somebody's desperate to speak at any stage. But what I'm going to ask each of the panelists is a fascinating set of panelists. I'm not going to try to introduce them individually. Somebody needs to turn off their YouTube. That's fine. We'll ask them getting some echo coming back from Max, I think. If you turn off your YouTube running in background. He's desperate to any stage. But what I'm going to ask each of the panelists is... Maybe we have to mute Max. Thanks. Right. So let's introduce the panelists one by one, by themselves. And I'd like each of you to just briefly say if there was anything that Professor Bengio said that particularly struck you. If you thought, yes, this is what the world needs to hear, or if you thought, oh my goodness, this is missing, this is wrong, this is misleading. So who wants to jump in first? Let's go to Max, since you were noisy before. You're mute again now, so we have to unmute you. Yes.
Greetings from beautiful Korea. You can see in the background here. I completely agree with everything Yoshua said. I want to first say a huge thank you for the massive effort you put into doing the report that we're going to be hearing more about tomorrow here. I think this is it's going to be interesting to see to what extent people here can be made to take these issues as seriously as a lot of AI researchers do. Because I think a lot of people out there, even a lot of very smart people, still just don't believe that we are going to get AGI. It feels like science fiction. It feels unreal. They think that it's going to be like when we invented electricity, and there's going to be some kind of endpoint, like everybody has electricity, and then development stops. I almost feel like the biggest challenge we have to help the people appreciate the urgency is just an education challenge, not so much a persuasion challenge.
Thanks. Let's hear some words from Holly Elmore.
Hi, I'm Holly Elmore, and I'm the executive director of Pause AI US. And the thought that I most persistently had was, you mentioned sort of that getting everybody to stop is unrealistic, but I thought, well, isn't provably safe somewhat unrealistic as well? So I think it's really important that the solution we adopt include the possibility that we can't make AGI safely. We can't align it safely, and especially that we can't align it safely in time. So I think pause either way, you get time, and if you don't, I don't think that it's an unrealistic solution, or I think it's similar in ambition to things like.
No, I think it will. It could become the only solution, politically speaking, but not currently. I don't see this happening. That being said, I think we should always keep it as okay. So if I mean, this is the whole point of evaluations, right? So if we see signs that we're approaching AGI, then governments and corporations should have agreed to stop beforehand, right? That's the way to think about it. But unconditionally stopping now, although I think it is the right thing to do, I just don't think politically it would fly. But Okay, again, politically, we can have multiple prongs here. So I think it's fine to have people voicing the need to stop now, and also people who are saying at the same time, okay, so if you don't stop, here are things you could do to reduce the risks. These are not incompatible.
Mm. Sorry,
Well,
so can
we'll
I
continue this.
clarify? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, let's keep going around the panel so everybody can have a chance to set some cards on the table. Will Henshaw, if you say who you are and any comments on what you've heard so far.
Sure. I'm Will Henschel. I'm an editorial fellow at Time Magazine, where I mainly write about technology with a focus on AI. I think the beginning of the talk that Yoshua gave made me realize, or just refreshed my mind, how much there is to do both on the technical side and on the political side. And yeah, when we got to the technical stuff, I think Max is right in that most people are very far away from agreeing with Yoshua and others on this call in terms of the sorts of policy solutions required. And if those are the things required, then there's going to be a lot of consensus building needed to be done.
And the journalists such as yourself might help in some way to build consensus.
Yeah, perhaps.
Let's turn to Stijn Bronvaar.
Hi, my name is Stijn Bronswaar. I'm a Dutch reporter for national newspaper NRC, and I'm one of the two AI reporters we have in our country. So I think that also adds to my point. What struck me in Joshua's speech is that the global awareness that the public really wants that, but still politicians and also in journalism, there's not been as much attention as needed, I think, for this topic. Here in the Netherlands, we have a new government since last week, and the political parties made an agreement. There's 28 pages of new plans for the country, and there were 2 sentences about AI in this document. So I think that said it all.
Thanks. Let's hear from Jan Tallinn.
Hello, I'm Jan Tallinn. I'm a co-founder of Future Flight Institute together with Max here, as well as the Cambridge Center for the Study of Existential Risk. And I support philanthropically many other organizations spending over the last decade throwing money at the problem as it's getting bigger. So I guess one thing that I would highlight when Yoshua said that we have like a problem that has like 2 prongs. One is like solving the technical challenge of control and alignment, and the other is the coordination challenge, making sure that the world is on the same page when it comes to actual response. And I do support also financially Yoshua's effort in the first category, which is basically a safe by design approach, which I think is sort of like the constructive response of, so what should we do if we would get a pause or something? And in this second prong, solving the coordination challenge, I think there are like 2 strategies or like 2 sub-strategies there. Like one is hardware governance, and there's like interesting ideas like what can be done using just the existing capabilities that NVIDIA chips, for example, already have. So like I would just like highlight like this is an iPhone, and everybody like owners of iPhone can prick the iPhone remotely, and the NVIDIA chips, as far as I know, already support that kind of capability. So we need to tap into this capability in order to actually regain some of the ability to steer the AI course. And the other sub-strategy of this like coordination challenge category is building conditional consensus about like if, as Yoshua said, like people have like different ideas about what's going to happen in the next few years or few decades. Some people think that like we're going to have GPT-4 for next few 100 years now. Some people like me think it's just a few months now left in GPT-4 lifetime. But like we could potentially get a conditional agreement about, okay, like if something happens, what our response should be. So both people who think that X will not happen, they should also agree with people who think that X will happen.
Lots of important questions there, but before we pursue them further, let's hear from Arjun Ramani.
I just have a comment about this.
Okay.
So Jan is very right. One of the things I've noticed, even with people I kind of disagreed on many things, that they agree, like there are a lot of AI researchers who agree that if we get to AGI and more, that would be very dangerous, right? So there's a lot more consensus about that, and so this could drive action, at least conditional agreement on what to do in that case.
Conditional agreement, right? Arjun?
Hi, so I'm Arjun Ramani. I'm The Economist global business correspondent and co-led our AI coverage last year. And I thought the presentation was really, really strong. I would just maybe add two observations. One is for our reporting, we talked to a lot of business leaders who are trying to adopt this technology. And I think where some of the skepticism might come from is that the evals don't quite yet capture what it takes to accomplish tasks in the real world. So, these kind of real world bottlenecks, multi-step tasks, and so on and so forth. So I think that's a very important area for, when we're developing dangerous capability evaluations, where to look to. I just saw this very striking statistic right before this call where the Census Bureau, they do these bi-weekly surveys of businesses on how often they use AI. About 200,000 US businesses, and only around 5 to 6% use it or plan to use it in the next 6 months, which I was actually quite surprised by. The second observation is just one due to Michael Nielsen. He has this point that, even if our technical alignment efforts are successful, that might actually accelerate the proliferation of AI systems. And then my definition of safe might not be the same as your definition of safe. Which makes me think that the misuse problems will, assuming the progress does continue at a fast clip, will be where a lot of attention should be paid. So again, pointing to the importance of thinking about, how these systems interact with the real world, for example, ordering chemicals if you are trying to build a bioweapon or something like that is important to pay attention to.
I want to go back to the first round of the Q&A. The question that had the most votes then was about how do we get coordination done? And in particular, should we be working closely with the United Nations as the world's premier coordination body, or are other mechanisms more likely to be more effective in this? Any fans of the UN? Max? You're muted again. I have to unmute you. Great. Thanks for putting up your hand, by the way.
I certainly support the UN, but I think, as Yoshua said, policymakers ultimately only react to pressure. And what really needs to happen is for there to be massive, widespread concern among ordinary people around the world, among business leaders, and everybody in between. And I think if we fail to do it, thanks to you journalists on this call and by traditional educational efforts, then what'll probably happen instead is we'll have, if we're lucky, the first major disaster we'll have with AI will not kill everybody, but it'll be a wake-up call that will really freak people out, and that can then catalyze action. So that's another reason why it's so important, even if there doesn't seem to be political will today, to do what Yoshua was suggesting: develop clear research agendas, clear policy agendas for what should happen if the political will once happens. So when it happens, it can be channeled into a good thing. I want to say on the list of political things to be done, following up on what Jan Tallinn mentioned, if you're driving a car, even if you think that you're never going to be in a situation where you need to do an emergency stop or think it's very unlikely, you probably still want to have brakes so that if some kid runs out in front of your car or whatever, you have the ability to stop, right? And right now, we don't have brakes for the AI race. So that's why it's very interesting to at least talk about seeing if we can get people to agree that we should build some kind of brakes. It could be hardware governance, it could be other things. We're not there.
Yoshua?
Yes, about the UN and the geopolitical kind of challenges and potential directions. So first, there's the question of proliferation, right? The risks of misuse and loss of control, they very probably grow with the number of powerful AIs and number of like AGI projects that are in the world. And once governments understand that, and there are already some governments who understand that, and once the UN understands that, and there are already people at the UN who understand that, then there'll be growing pressure to come up with treaties to, not like non-proliferation agreements, but it's not so simple because there is the haves and the have-nots here, right? A few countries have AI labs that can, that are building these things, and most countries are just out of that power circle. But if you're the United States and you are concerned about this proliferation because it can, a dangerous AI anywhere can harm Americans, then you'd like to find a way to convince all the countries to do the right thing in terms of coordination. But the other countries, they want to get all the benefits of AI, right? So how do we solve that? Well, I think there are bad ways of solving it, like by force, and good ways where there's a trade, right? So some of the benefits of the good sides of AI could go to these countries, but also the governance of these AGI projects, I think, should be including a international component. And so the UN has a role in all this in many ways. So first of all, it's like the right place to negotiate these kinds of international treaties. And those treaties should include representatives of all the have-nots on the boards, for example, of the organizations building those AGIs. And so I think the UN, even though it has lots of issues and weaknesses, can have the legitimacy of doing these things, and we should help it achieve them.
Thanks. Holly, as the Executive Director of Pause AI in the US, what would you like to add?
You addressed a little bit what I wanted to add, which is that I actually think the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is a great example of how to include, there's this whole, one of the three pillars of the treaty is civilian uses of nuclear technology and the responsibility that nuclear countries have to non-nuclear countries to give benefits. I would love to see people working out more what this would look like for AI. It seems, if anything, perhaps easier. But I draw a lot of inspiration from that. For what it's worth, I think the UN should be where we're going for global coordination on this.
Any other views on this? In that case, let's move to a question about education. A question by Nikki Drozdowski. Do we need a high-impact documentary like An Inconvenient Truth that rose awareness of climate change? Do we need something similar for existential risk? Would that accelerate a useful, constructive global discussion? Max?
I think that would be great, but I think that it's probably not enough. There have already been some reasonably good documentaries, but there's a lot of psychology in this also. As Upton Sinclair quipped, it's hard to make someone understand something when their paycheck depends on them not understanding it, right? And just as we spent decades and decades where tobacco companies didn't want to understand that smoking increased the risk of lung cancer by 1,000%, we see very similar things going on now when you have all these pundits saying there's nothing to worry about. The basic arguments for why we should worry are really obvious. Right? Alan Turing pointed it out in 1951 that if you have if we shouldn't think of AI as another technology like electricity. We should think of it as ultimately becoming a new species that's just much smarter than us and better at us at everything. And as Turing said, the default outcome is that new species takes control. And maybe it wants to do something else with our solar system, turn the sun into a Dyson sphere, or we have no idea. But there's the default outcome is that there's no particular reason it should be nicer to us than we are to ants in our basement or whatever. And it's just not very complicated. But I think there's a huge psychological resistance from people who just don't want to, people who might otherwise be able to understand it, they don't want to understand it because they don't like that they would have to make less money that way. And they thereby sort of prevent the vast majority of people from understanding how strong the case is for why this is dangerous. Just like the tobacco companies did with smoking.
Psychological issue, or are there other more charitable explanations as to why people don't see what others claim to be obvious arguments about the dangers of AI?
Well, just to add to that, I mean, why did it take from 1955 until 1980 until smoking risks became widely known? Because the tobacco companies were the main advertisers in the newspapers. They had massive lobbying power, and they managed to basically sow confusion and doubt and prevent most people from understanding that this was an open and shut case. 1,000% increase in lung cancer risk is not a small effect. Wasn't hard. But propaganda works, and similarly today, there's a massive lobbying effort from all these tech companies to pretend that it's very subtle and complicated whether there's a risk of loss of control, and it works.
Can I add to that? I totally agree with what Mac's saying. I think I don't know if a single documentary could make a difference. You see with the case of the British Post Office, for example, it's very interesting that a TV show changed the complete narrative on this topic, and that things can happen because of a strong story. I know this myself. It's a difficult topic still because there's a big part of the audience that still has no idea what AI is. So there's a lot of educating to do. On the other hand, there are a lot of people that stick their head in the sand and are like, hey, this is maybe something in the future that's going to be dangerous. Same with climate change. I'm not going to think about this. So what you see with more eminent threats, like things like voice cloning, and which has been used to defraud people, deep fakes. I do see, and copyright issues with musicians. Those are the stories right now that have been picked up and that do stick. But I think for journalists, it's going to be that's also something that I have to do myself. It's the challenge is to write the stories about the real dangers, of course. But it's very difficult. It's very difficult to get that to stick. I'm curious how other journalists do that, though.
I agree with all this, but I would reinforce one message, which is, there's a role for emotions here. Emotions are about going from a thought to an action, right? They move you. So if we only have documentaries, it could make people rationally think about it and then go back to their normal life and not change anything, just like it's been for climate. And so I think we need fiction as well, that tells stories that we emotionally that emotionally touch us. My personal story is like the time when I really flipped my opinions about the dangers of AI is when I was thinking about my children, right? So it's really an emotion that makes us do the right thing or the wrong thing in some cases, but at least they bring us to action. So I think I'd be surprised if we don't see a flurry of fiction with dangerous AIs. The problem is how they're going to be done, right? If they need to be done in a way that's as close as possible to what science, things could happen, what scientists think could happen. There's a danger of these things being easily rejected as science fiction, And so I think if we work on that aspect of those fiction works, we'll have a greater chance of a positive influence on the understanding at an emotional level that can't be easily rejected.
Thanks. Jan?
So one thing to keep in mind is that like the world post ChatGPT is very different than pre ChatGPT. So I do expect the most of the kind of awareness to actually come from the activity of AI companies rather than film industry. That said, of course, it's kind of still valuable to have movies, but they have to be made really fast now to be kind of like ready and project like what would happen once you have like not GPT 4.5, but GPT 5 or GPT 6, and what could go wrong.
Will, like to say anything now?
I think on the idea of there being one really good documentary, I think you have to meet people where they're coming from. Everyone has a different cultural milieu, and the idea that there's going to be one documentary. So I think it's just if you are someone who takes these issues seriously, then you can speak to your friends, you can write about it, and if you're a filmmaker, then you could do that. And I think the more there is, the better. I don't think the idea of a philanthropist, for example, funding one really good documentary is it. Yeah, I suppose that's my main thought to the original question posed. Yeah.
Ollie.
On the topic of emotion or like engaging emotions, this is why Pause AI does protests. I'd heard from like kind of incredulous people many times about AI risk. Like, well, if this is true, like, why aren't people in the streets? Like, why aren't people talking about this? And it is for weird historical reasons, the AI safety community didn't like to talk about it because, they were tired of being considered crazy, or they didn't want to like get in the way of, other good things that they could do. Like they didn't want to disqualify themselves from certain jobs or, by talking about AI risk. But now we do have now the public, the polls show that we can talk to the public about this, and the public has a base understanding. And I don't love throwing protests, honestly. It's really hard, but but we get so much, people just instantly grok the tone, what's going on here, no matter how complicated like the issues of AI, and understanding the technical details. People understand when you show up in front of a building and you say like, I have a problem with you, and like they get it very quickly. So that's why I do protests, I think, are so important. There's a lot more room for more people to do things like protests that make clear how they feel about the issue and just what they want, we have the luxury as advocates of not having to figure out exactly how this plan would work or how it would be realized scientifically. We just get to say like, we want AI paused.
And you've been involved in a number of protests. Are the numbers growing? Is there a momentum starting to accelerate?
Well, we get amazing coverage for very small protests. It's interesting how it's evolved. So my protests are still very tiny. And I would have thought that would get in the way, but we get just amazing media coverage. I think just because of the nature of the issue, I think it's been very hard to put any kind of human face or story on AI safety for a long time. And so tech reporters are really excited and documentarians. We've had multiple documentary crews want to like see the beginnings of a possible new social movement. So yeah, that's all going really well.
So a small number of people can help to change the world. Who would have guessed? How are you? What would you like to say?
I have a question for you, Holly. So one of the things that I'm most worried about that I mentioned in my presentation are the people who actually would willingly make superhuman AI take over. I feel like this is even it's a small minority, it's one of the greatest dangers ahead. But this is also something where public opinion, should rally. Like 99% of people want to see their children and grandchildren have a life, and don't have this kind of crazy idealism about intelligence being like the most important thing in the world. So I feel like there's a story here that that most people can understand, right? And that is more powerful than just let's stop. Is, well, we need to make sure that we don't allow humanity to be replaced by humans who have such a very an extreme view of things.
There are a number of these kind of extreme, like tech culture related beliefs that are public. Like, like people talk about curing death. They talk about there's just they talk about their high P doom, or when I say people, I mean like AI company CEOs. The public still doesn't quite grasp it, I think, because it's so foreign from the way they think. Like, I think that's why you get these wild stories about regulatory capture, because people just do not understand and do not accept that somebody would go ahead with a course of action that they thought had a high chance of killing everyone, lights out for everyone. And so they come up with some story of how this is really some grift and none of this is true. I'm very interested in making people understand, like, no, a lot of the people behind this stuff really do believe some radically different things, and they have like very different values. I do think that if we could make people grasp that, then they would they would see very quickly, because they also trust these people, right? As these are the people who are building it. These are the people who know about AGI, and so they hear their opinions and their conclusions, but they don't really understand that they have like radically different premises. And I would love to be more successful at communicating that.
So I may have a slightly different read of the perception on this question. So I was just looking at some Pew Research survey data, and in 2021, 18% of U.S. respondents to one of their surveys were more excited than concerned. 45% were about the same, and then 37% of respondents were more concerned than excited. And then the most recent survey, which was last year, 2023, so after ChatGPT and also GPT-4, it was 52% who were more concerned than excited. And when I talk to just regular people, like even my parents, they seem to be relatively concerned, especially about job loss. I actually think, I remember when I was in DC last year, just talking to Hill staffers and some senators about this question who recently had been briefed on AI, Todd Young, my home state senator, Maria Cantwell, and so on and so forth. After they had been briefed by a lot of academics and experts, they actually grew less concerned. And so I actually think there's more disagreement among the AI academic community on the pace of near-term AI progress. I think most people would agree that things are uncertain and we should obviously be prepared. But in terms of, I think that my read of the general perception among, people within the tech space is that the likelihood of fast takeoffs is relatively small. And that's why, even if it's good to be prepared, there's time to readjust. And I think that means that in order to push things forward more in the near term, I think basically there needs to be stronger arguments that there is a serious risk of short-term harm at the catastrophic level. And I mean, that's the thing that I would be very curious to read more of is, assessments looking at things like comparing, the use of a frontier AI model with Google search, and can I do much, much worse things, for example. And I think that type of research and so forth is what's going to change minds within the tech community.
And if you look at the serious betting sites like Metaculus, the time remaining to AGI has dropped from 25 years in the future to December 2026 when I looked 2 days ago. And now we're going to have GPT 4.5 coming out and so on. So I guess it depends on who you...
The general public aren't going to be impressed by Metaculus betting sites. They're going to need concrete arguments. They're going to think, oh, there's a bunch of nerds who are just betting. What are the concrete arguments that there might be a fast takeoff and we might reach AGI by December 2026?
By just making lists of all the things that AI still cannot do year by year and seeing how they get checked off rapidly. And I mean, the report that Yoshua spearheaded here has some really good technical nerd stuff on precisely that. I find there's quite a disconnect when I talk to people who do AI research in academia and in company, because AI is a very wide field, right? And someone who's working on self-driving cars is quite far intellectually from the people who work on trying to build super intelligence. It's about as far as someone who works in dermatology is from brain surgery. And just because someone is a dermatologist doesn't mean that they are necessarily the best and most trustworthy people to go talk to about brain surgery. But yet they feel very entitled just because they say, oh, what I'm doing is AI, so I'm a super pundit and I know best. And I actually felt that there's, in some way, a little bit more arrogance from people who feel that somehow they have the entitlement to know best than people who are from a completely different field, who go into it with more epistemic humility.
I'm going to add something to this, if that's okay, David. So one of the arguments I find most convincing is, the category of recursive self-improvement. But let me put it in words that I think could make sense to people. We're seeing the programming abilities of the strongest AI systems grow, and they're becoming, and we're starting to use them even in AI safety, right? We're starting to use machine learning to help us achieve some of the goals. So there could be, at some point, an acceleration as our AI becomes better. They can help us accelerate the advances in capabilities, and if we do the right thing, also on safety. But that's going to depend on the incentive. But my point is, as we approach AGI, there's going to be likely, because the AI is used to design AI, an acceleration. And of course, once we go beyond human level, then that acceleration could even, be stronger, because now we have something that's even better than human researchers. So I think that's the fundamental reason why we could have a much faster takeoff than people think. If we just extrapolate the current kind of progress, that, it's already scary. But if you take into account that there could be a feedback loop with AI helping to design AI, I think that really becomes much more concerning. And I think that's something that can be explained to people.
We're almost out of time, although we haven't solved all the problems in this field. Nevertheless, I am going to ask each of the people here to offer some brief concluding remarks on anything that you feel needs to be highlighted. And if you're not sure what to say, I will ask you to address the top voted question, which is by Yelte. Again, that's Yele Donders. What would each of you say is currently the most undervalued bottleneck for mitigating risk from AI? What's tractable for making progress with reasonably small efforts? So where shall we start? Will?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to address that question, but I think something I would say is that I think a lot of this has been quite doom and gloom, and everyone is quite pessimistic about solving some of the challenges. I do think panels like this, the fact that this summit is happening, I think the people laboring on these sorts of problems for decades, there was a very small group of people. And I think the fact that there are much more people flooding into this field, both that just increases the sheer number of talented people who want to try and solve these problems. I also think it's great that the number of viewpoints represented from different countries, different political affiliations, is going to help spot a bunch of blind spots that were initially baked into some of the solutions that people were thinking about these problems a decade ago or more. And so, yeah, whilst I think most of this discussion has been quite concerning, I think on the whole, I feel a lot more optimistic than I did about these sorts of problems a year or two ago, primarily just as a result of all of these people becoming interested in these sorts of problems.
So there are grounds for optimism despite the very significant challenges. Steen.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, but I think that's more something for the scientists to answer. For me, my concluding remarks would be: I think what we all here have in common is that we want more awareness on this topic, and I think everybody can play a role in that. Like if you go join a demonstration on the streets, or if you do amazing research, or in our case, if we do really good reporting, I think. I think that's what binds us. So that will be that's my final thought. With this, I'm going to do even more and better reporting on this topic.
Oh, many thanks. Jan Tallinn.
So I think, as I said earlier, like people have different models of what AI cannot do anytime soon, or what it can do. So I think like the lowest hanging fruit is just like promote this meta awareness that people have different assumptions about what the AI capabilities are and what they will be, and then B, use that awareness, channel that awareness into kind of conditional agreements about how should we react if some kind of red lines will be crossed.
Arjun.
So I think, let's assume we get to a very, very powerful AGI, something much more dangerous than the internet. And let's just assume it's aligned to the intent of the deployer. So we solve the technical alignment problem. I still think there's, hearkening to the opening, a risk of misuse. And I would basically just endorse the view of safety as not a model property. And let's say you're worried about people synthesizing bioweapons. You will have to monitor flows of chemicals and biological substances throughout society. If you're worried about harms within the internet, like cyber attacks, you'll probably need to monitor deployment of AI on the internet and so forth. And I think the big risk here is, a response from governments that compromises other rights. So I think that's a huge research area. How do you effectively make society safer without compromising on privacy? And I think there's some very interesting cryptographic work to be done on that question. So I think maybe that's one place where maybe there's less attention now that I think will probably become more important in the future.
Thanks. Holly?
My closing thought is that pause via government means is realistic. And as we were speaking about before, we've done it before with nuclear weapons. And I think pushing a robust and simple advocacy message like Pause AI could really rally existing public opinion. So as we were saying, like there's high agreement with the need for regulation, but it's kind of a lower priority issue, like a sort of simple, general, but also clear way forward like Pause AI. I think can make that more salient, make it more clear to other people, create common knowledge that there's a lot of agreement about this. And pause also addresses other harms. So the question is about X risk, but when you implement a solution like pause, you also pause other harms that are that at least haven't already occurred. So I think reasons all around for pause.
Thanks. Max, and feel free to give us any news from Seoul as to what's actually being discussed there.
All right. But most of it's going to be tomorrow. We're having a nice night time behind me now. On a personal note, I'm planning to continue working really hard with my research group at MIT on the quantitative AI safety agenda that Yoshua was talking about earlier. And on the policy side, I think it's really pretty obvious what needs to happen. We need to start treating AI like all other powerful tech, where there are clear safety standards in place. And instead of having if someone launches a new drug, you're not going to be in the situation that scientists are like, oh no, are we going to figure out how to make this drug safe before 1 billion people have taken it? No, people can't sell it until they've met the safety standards. That's why we have the FDA, right? And as soon as we can do something similar with AI, then Yoshua and others won't have to rush so much to try to finish figuring out how to make things controllable before someone releases it, because instead the companies will have an incentive to figure out how to make it controllable so that they can release it. And to end on an optimistic note, so we don't just have all doom and gloom here, I think we need to remember that everything we love about civilization is the product of intelligence. So if we can actually keep our AI under control, we can use it to solve basically all the problems that have stumped humankind up until now, and create a future which will be more inspiring than anything our science fiction writers could dream about.
Indeed. Yoshua, closing words.
Yes. I want to focus on how we should manage risks. So I think we can turn the disagreements that exist in the AI community into something that has a clear direction for action. So when the level of potential harm is huge, then logically, and we do it in other fields, we should put the bar for acting to prevent those risks much lower. In other words, even if the probabilities are very small, but because the potential harm is huge, we should make sure it doesn't happen. So even if we're like, let's say, Jan-Luca and I disagree, and maybe I'm right, maybe he's right, but the consequences are very different. It's very asymmetric. And so this is what we do in other areas of risk. We start the prevention, even though the probabilities of bad things happening is small, when the level of danger in terms of what could happen, how bad things could turn, is very high. So this is a very simple principle. And if the public understands that, then, in spite of existing divisions, that, that would yield to doing the right thing in terms of precautions.
Humans don't need to be
and by the way,
unified in order to do great things together. Yeah.
Everything I said here is not just about X risk. It includes misuse. It includes the risks of things that are happening this year with elections. It's, this is a general principle of risk management.
So we can agree, even though we have disagreements in many parts, we can figure out the most important things which, despite being red political or green political or blue political or purple political, nevertheless, we can get together. So I want to thank each of the panelists for giving up their time on this subject. Thanks to all of you. Thanks to everybody posting questions on Slido. We didn't get to most of them. There are lots of good questions there. We will archive the questions and send them to the panelists just in case any of them spark a new idea that leads to an important breakthrough new project. And what I'll do to finish is I'd like to hand over to the Executive Director of the Existential Risk Observatory, Otto Barton. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. And thank you all for being here. I would like to say it's truly wonderful to have so many amazing speakers at the third edition of our AI Safety Summit talks. I hope our event has succeeded at least somewhat in explaining why future AI could be an existential risk and sharing ideas on what we can do about this. I think there is something deeply absurd about human extinction being actually on the table. Before Darwin, people could not imagine any species going extinct, least of all humans. And it's still hard to get one's head around this. And there is something very sad about all this being an actual option. So we want not to think about this. And I'm not one of the people who have P-dooms of 99%. I think there are a number of ways in which we may be lucky. Perhaps human-level AI will not be invented in, say, the next 100 years. Perhaps it will be invented, but its capabilities will be relatively disappointing, and the intelligence ceiling of what can be built will be too low to be able to cause human extinction. Or perhaps alignment will turn out to be easy, and good AIs will win from bad AIs, as existential risk skeptic Jan LeCun hoped. Perhaps we will get clear warning shots, showing to everyone the severity of the problem. Or perhaps none of this will happen. It seems all too probable to me that AI will in fact develop sufficient capabilities to gain the upper hand over us slow and clumsy humans. It seems all too probable that alignment will turn out to be extremely difficult. It seems likely to me that aggressive AIs will have an evolutionary advantage over nice defensive ones. This could be because offense will turn out to be fundamentally easier than defense, as is likely the case in cyberspace or biowarfare, or it could be because being able to mobilize all resources without having to take into account any limitations we impose will turn out to be a decisive advantage. It seems not unlikely that we will not get sufficient warning shots, since the technology could suddenly work once we pass the last algorithmic hurdles, just like the first airplane suddenly got off the ground when the Wright brothers conquered the last technical issues. And even if we do get warning shots, we may well ignore them, or we may simply be unable to find a way to solve the problem, even with widespread knowledge of its existence. This could be because of political issues, or because reliably containing AI will turn out to be beyond our capabilities. So my P-doom is not 99%, but it's an appreciable figure. And what bothers me is that it seems to be a game of luck. Amsterdam, where I'm talking from now, is mostly built underneath modern high water levels. In the Netherlands, we have experience with stopping to rely on luck. From the Middle Ages onwards, deep religiousness did not stop monks from taking their fate into their own hands and building dikes against the rising sea. This did not reduce flooding probability to zero, as was evident by the 50 floods that happened from the Middle Ages until now, and during the last one in 53, 1,836 people drowned. Bad luck. Humanity is used to relying on luck. We are used to developing science, technology, and many other things in a trial and error way. However, when we are increasing our reach over nature by inventing ever more capable technology, the trial and error method breaks down. We can see that in the climate crisis, where we turn out to be largely unable to mitigate our own technology's externalities. We can also see this in biotechnology, where even an enormous pandemic did not prove sufficient to strengthen biosecurity and biodefense to a truly safe level. We miraculously have not had any nuclear war, despite an enormous arsenal of earth-shattering weapons at hair trigger alert, but there is no guarantee that this luck will continue. And I'm afraid we will see this in AI again. We might just rely on luck instead of trying to reduce AI's existential risk in a structural way. To me, the real concern about existential risk is that luck will not save us anymore. If we apply Murphy's Law to existential events in a world where causing human extinction gets ever easier, we would need to conclude that our chances of survival are slim. Therefore, I would really like to see us finding ways to rely less on luck and more on risk management. For AI, there are in fact many ways in which we can increase the probability of a good outcome. First, AI researchers should publish their existential concerns, debate their exact nature, and propose solutions. And I think Yoshua Bengio and others are leading the way here. Journalists and other leaders of the public debate should discuss these scientific outcomes and raise public awareness about AI's threats. Activists should remind governments that action needs to be taken to reduce these risks. And governments should make plans to mitigate AGI's existential risk and open them for public scrutiny. The AI safety summits that we have seen, including the one that is now happening in Seoul, Korea, are a hopeful sign that governments may coordinate their measures and may rely on risk management rather than luck. And I sincerely hope that this development will continue. So with these words, I'm now going to close our event, the AI Safety Summit Talks, and I'm extremely happy that you've all made this event possible, and I would like to thank especially the speakers, Yoshua Bengio, Max Tekmark, Jan Tellin, Holly Elmore, Arjun Ramani, Tijn Bronswaard, Will Henschel. Thank you all so much. I would also like to thank David Wood for being an amazing moderator and supporting us with everything else as well. And from the Existential Risk Observatory team, thanks so much to Jesper Isusius and Job Soren, who helped with everything behind the screens. And I would like to thank our audience for paying attention to this topic. There is also a follow-up event coming up in Amsterdam and online on the 6th of June, featuring Romy Polsky and many other great speakers. So we would very much like to welcome you there as well. And for now, have a great day. Don't rely too much on luck, and we hope to see you